Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to talk to you today about where amazing ideas come from. It's really a fascinating topic. People have written a lot about it. Some of what I'm going to talk about today comes from the work of a guy named Steven Johnson. If you've never heard of him, I would encourage you to go to Netflix or Google or Amazon Prime or something and look at the series that he's just come out with last summer, which is pretty cool. A lot of stuff about who makes ideas, where they come from, and he really has a belief, and I agree with this, that great ideas are not really hatched where we usually think they're hatched. I mean, when we think of geniuses, we think about people like Einstein, and they're sitting at their desk, and all of a sudden they say, "Aha! I know how this happens." You know, the solitary genius. It turns out that's not really where it comes from. Very rarely does that happen. Usually things happen in collaboration with other people. They happen over a long period of time. And Johnson has two terms that I really like when he talks about this. One term is the adjacent possible. Well, what is the adjacent possible? The adjacent possible has to do with the fact that you can't really make any discoveries unless all the pieces are in place around you to allow you to make those discoveries. And all of these great things that happen, and the one that I'm going to talk about today, and I'm not going to tell you what the discovery is until the end of the talk, all of these things are made not in solo, but in collaboration with lots of other people. It's not a coincidence that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are about the same age. They were both tinkerers. They both worked on opposite sides of the country, but they both worked with lots of little tinkerers who liked to tinker with things just like they did. And they happened to be around at a time when the computer revolution was ready to take off. They happened to be in the right place at the right time. And that's what often happens. And the second term that Johnson talks about that I really like is the slow hunch. Now, the slow hunch is the idea that something happens, something germinates, you get an idea, and it doesn't occur to you right away what that idea is going to lead into. And sometimes it takes a long, long, long time for anything to come of ideas that people have. And in this case, the discovery that I'm going to talk about took 350 years to actually turn into something which you all use almost every day. So that's what I want to talk about today. So think about the slow hunch and think about the adjacent possible, the idea that you really need these things to be there. Let's start in the 1600s in this case. And I'm going to talk a little bit about physics, but don't panic. There are no equations here. There's nothing you really have to understand. Just sort of soak it in. Johann Kepler was a brilliant Polish physicist, and he took all the available research of the time having to do with planetary motion, and he looked at that planetary motion. He actually stole it all. You know, it was all developed by somebody else. That guy died. His relatives wanted it. He stole it, you know, pure and simple. But he was a brilliant guy, and he was able to make some conclusions, and he figured out that planets in general orbit around other planets and moons and things, and the sun. Planets going around the sun, they go basically in circular paths. They're ellipses, but they're basically go in circular paths. And a few years later, in the mid-1600s, this diagram on the board was drawn. Anybody know who drew that diagram? It's in every physics book you've ever seen. Any ideas? Isaac Newton drew that. Isaac Newton, brilliant physicist, and this whole story probably would not have progressed in exactly the way it did had it not been for the bubonic plague in 1665 to 1667. Now, it's impossible for us to understand what these plagues were today. Everybody in the senior class, stand up for a minute. Just real quick. Okay? Okay. Okay, you can sit down now. Thank you. If you had lived in London in 1665, that is approximately the percentage of people in this room who would have died from the bubonic plague, right? So if you had a community of 600 people, about 150 of them would have died from the bubonic plague. Senior class, gone, zip, right? So So these were terrible things, and not only that, it killed you in 4 days. You didn't even have time to settle your affairs. So it was, you know, it was pretty bad stuff. But what do you do if you have some money and the bubonic plague is going through London? You go out to your country estate. You know, you get the hell out of Dodge so that you're not going to get sick. So that's what Isaac Newton's parents did with him, and they sent him out into his country estate of Woolensthorpe or whatever, yeah, Woolensthorpe, and he just sort of sat around for about 2 years and just thought. And one of the things he thought about was what I'm going to show you right here. He drew this diagram right here. This is a diagram of the Earth, and it has a mountain on it. It's a big mountain. I estimate the height of the mountain to be 1,000 miles. You know, so it's exaggerated. You know, it's not something that you would really see. But as you can see, he is sort of shooting a cannon off the top of this mountain. And I'm going to show you, if you could switch down on my computer here, I'm going to show you in a little more detail what this looks like. Here's the Earth, and you can see that I have a cannon here. I don't have a mountain, so it's a little bit different. But this is a computer program which allows me to adjust the velocity of the cannon. Now I'm going to start out slow. I'm going to start out with a cannonball which is traveling at, 11,000 miles an hour. Now that's pretty quick. Let's see what 11,000 miles an hour looks like on our cannon. Well, that wasn't very spectacular. Let's juice it up a little bit. A little hard to see here. Let's go up to about, go up to about 13,000 miles an hour. Well, gee, that's not very good either. Let's juice it all the way up to the magic number of about 18,000 miles an hour, or about 8,000 meters per second. And look what happens. The ball is falling. It's continually falling towards the Earth, but it doesn't get any closer to the Earth because as it falls, the Earth drops away. So it just keeps going around. Newton figured this out in 1667. Okay, he got this idea that this could happen. But it was a little while before anybody did it, you know. 1959, right? From that time until 1959, there was no adjacent possible. There was no way to send this thing up into the sky. And who did it? The Russians did it, of course. And some of you may have heard about the Russian efforts to send Sputnik, which was this little, it was a sort of a pathetic thing when you think about it. It's a little bit bigger than a basketball, right? Sort of like that, right? And they painted it silver, they polished it up. They polished it up because they wanted everybody to see it. See, that was their real goal. They were proud that they got the first satellite up. And so they made it silver, they made it easy to see, so that everybody in the world can see it. Everybody in America, pretty much, of my age, okay, now in 1958, I was 10 years old, right? So everybody went out to see this. I still remember I lived in Pelham, New York, and they were building Route I-95 then, so they had huge areas of land cleared out where the road was going to go in, and most of that sector of 95 was finished. Thousands of people came there every night to see Sputnik. And it didn't come every night because it has, we won't go into the orbits, but you know, about every night or every other night, you could go out and you could look in the paper, you could find out exactly when it was going to come. And tens of thousands of people standing out on the what would become I-95, looking at the horizon. They'd see this little blip, and it would come up and go overhead, and a couple minutes later, it would sag down on the other side. And it was breathtaking. People would cheer, right? Now today, how many of you ever seen a satellite? See just a few hands go up? 70 or 80 of them go over every night, or more. You know, you can go out any night, lie down on the field, look up, and you'll see them. They're all over the place, right? But nobody pays any attention. But then it was a huge deal. You have no idea what a huge deal it was because politically this was really radical. What happened was the president at the time was Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was a military man. He had no interest in space whatsoever. He didn't really see any reason for it. And as you may know, at the end of World War II, 100 German scientists, about 100 German scientists, led by a guy named Werner von Braun, all surrendered to the Americans because they didn't want anything to do with the Russians at the time. So they basically fled off to a resort as the war was ending to hide. And then as soon as the Americans came in, they surrendered. They just turned themselves over and said they wanted to operate our missile program, which they did for years. But we never really got a satellite up. And a lot of people don't realize why that was. The reason that they didn't get a satellite up was at the time, it was the middle of the Cold War. We were sending planes occasionally over Russia to try and spy on them. And Russia would try to shoot those planes out of the sky every time we did. And they would do the same thing to us. They'd sort of tweak around with the borders and try and send some planes up and spy on what we were doing, where our missiles were located, where everything was happening. And it was a cat and mouse game. And President Eisenhower, being a military guy, he had this knowledge. He said he knew a little bit about Sir Isaac Newton, nothing about the physics, but he knew that these orbits might be possible. But he was afraid if we sent a satellite over Russia, that could lead to a world war, because it would be seen as spying. But now Russia did it. So they opened the gates. And so now Eisenhower said, okay, full bore. And von Braun and these guys took off and they started trying to solve this problem of getting a satellite in orbit. It didn't take very long. The satellite that the Russians sent up went up on October 4th. The Americans got one up by January 6th. So it was only about 3 months until things sort of flattened out and we had these satellites in orbit. What was Sputnik? It was almost nothing. Everybody thought, well, maybe they're spying on it. Maybe it has cameras. Maybe it has radios in it. It did have a radio in it. Could you play the sound of Sputnik for us? Here's what it sounded like if you got a radio, if you homed into the signal. Thanks, Eddie. That's good. So, not very spectacular, just a tiny little signal, a little beep. Who discovered this beep? This is where the story starts to get really interesting. Johns Hopkins University at the time was not a college like it is now. They didn't have a lacrosse team. They didn't have undergraduates. As a matter of fact, it was a very prestigious university, but they had only graduate students, and mostly physics and medicine. That's how it started. In the cafeteria at Johns Hopkins University, 1958, the day after Sputnik went up, a couple of really bright guys, one of them was named William Guire and the other was named George Wiffenbach. These two guys are sitting at lunch and they're talking with their buddies about Sputnik. Everybody's talking about Sputnik because we've got this thing orbiting around and it's shocking. And so they're talking about this and their field is, they're physicists. Their field is microwave transmission and various things, and one of them says, you know, we might have all the equipment to find out whether Sputnik is putting out a noise. And they found this noise. They were the first people to find this noise. And they said, not only that, but if we find this noise, we may be able to do something with this noise. And they actually were able to do something with this noise. President Eisenhower had asked all his top advisors whether we could find out how big Sputnik was. We couldn't. There was no way to do it. He asked if we could find out the mass, asked if we could find out the orbit. Nobody knew anything about these things. And it wasn't possible to find out. But these two guys, who were both 23 years old, they're not much older than you guys in the front row here. These two guys figured out that when the satellite goes over, right, it first approaches you, then it goes over you, and then it leaves you. So that should give you what's called a Doppler shift. Now, we're not going to get into too many of the details of the Doppler shift, but I do want to show you a really quick little film here, which will help you to understand what this is all about and why it's so important. You see this planet here? It's putting out some signals. We're going to lift it up a little so it doesn't crash into the spacecraft over there. Down at the bottom on the left, this is what the frequency of the thing looks like, okay? And now as it approaches, See the way the waves pile up in the front? Now watch what happens to the frequency when they hit that. Boom, frequency goes up. And then after it leaves, the frequency goes down again. Let's look at it one more time so you can really appreciate what's going on. This is what happens. See, the frequency is going to be constant now. And then as we launch this thing over a little bit here, grab it again, and we'll send it on its way. And you'll see the way they pile up in the front. Here they go. And now the frequency on the bottom, you'll see, gets very short. So the frequency gets smaller, the wavelength gets shorter, and you can see that it pops up like that. This is why when you watch NASCAR races, the cars, as they go by you, they go, you know, it starts high and it goes low, right? The car is making the same noise the whole time. It's just at first it's approaching you, and then it's right at you, and that's when you hear what it really does, and then it leaves you. Well, what's the importance of this? These guys were able to figure out exactly what the orbit looked like. They could find out the velocity, and if you know the velocity by the Doppler shift, that unlocks all the secrets of the orbits. They knew exactly where this Sputnik was. And if you knew where it was, you could take pictures of it, and then you could figure out how big it was. They unlocked the whole thing. And these are just two graduate students, not related to NASA or anybody else. The following spring, we had some orbits. We had some planets, some satellites in orbit. The Russians put up more satellites in orbit. And the following spring, the head of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics program called them in. They walked in the office. He said, "Close the door. I have to talk to you." He said, "I had a visit today from the Secretary of the Navy. He wants to talk to you." Really? Yes, the Secretary of the Navy. It's all top secret stuff, but they want to talk to you. What they want to know is, do you think it would be possible to do this whole problem in reverse? Could you flip it on its head? Well, what are you talking about? He said, well, if you were in the satellite, yeah, right. If you were in the satellite, right, could you do the same calculations you did and look down on the Earth and figure out where something was on the Earth? And they said, I really have no idea, but let's work on it. So they went back to their lab. It took them 3 days. They used the help of a computer, which barely existed in those days. They were all used vacuum tubes. They had the latest and greatest. It was called ENIAC, and they ran their numbers through the computer, and they figured out that they would indeed be able, if they had that data, they would indeed be able to figure out where things were located by looking at someplace on the Earth. So then they met with the Secretary of the Navy. And they said, well, why do you want to know this? And they said, well, we're in the middle of the Cold War here. You know, most of our nuclear warheads, a lot of them are located in Montana or Wyoming or in silos in various places, but not all of them. Most of them are located on Polaris submarines, which is great. We know exactly how far these missiles will fire, where they will land. There's only one problem. We really don't know where the Polaris submarines are exactly. So you're trying to fire something that you know is going to go 1,578 miles, but you're not really sure whether your Polaris submarine is located at a particular place in the Pacific or another place in the Pacific. So now President Eisenhower's idea comes to fruition, right? There might be a use for the space program having to do with military applications. And here's what they were able to do. Within 5 years of when the first satellites went up, the United States had 5 satellites in orbit. They were highly classified. Nobody knew anything about them. Nobody knew what they were doing. But all those satellites were doing was locating the Polaris submarines, so they knew exactly where the Polaris submarines were. So if they had to fire any missiles, God help us, at Russia or anybody else, that they would be able to tell exactly where those missiles were going to land because they knew exactly where they were going to start. So they now had a pretty good idea of how to work this technology, and this technology was classified and it remained classified. It had a name. They called it the transit system. I don't know why they came up with that. It sounds like a Boston subway, but they called it the transit system. And it remained classified until 1983. So we're going from 1958, when this system was first developed, to 1983, when the system was revealed to the world. And it was revealed to the world by, at the suggestion, at the command of Ronald Reagan, who was president at the time. And the thing which brought him to decide to release this technology so that everybody could have it was a Korean airliner flight 007, which drifted into Soviet airspace. And when it drifted into Soviet airspace, the Soviets thought that it was an enemy plane. They blew it out of the sky. It was just a commercial jetliner. 375 people were killed. And Reagan said, we really have to end this, because we know where our planes are. We know where our submarines are. And this transit system will tell you exactly where you are on the Earth by looking at the satellite data, which comes from the satellites which are orbiting around. Today, those satellites that are orbiting around are not 5 that keep track of Polaris submarines, but there are in fact 30 of them. And their only mission, these satellites, is to locate things on the Earth, right? Exactly as they located the Polaris submarines in 1958. What is this? GPS. This is how your phone knows where you are. This is how when you lose your phone, you can look right on your phone and you can find out where your phone is. That phone is communicating with satellites indirectly, and those satellites are pinpointing, triangulating, and figuring out exactly where you are. And when you have a GPS system in your car, you get that little annoying message that says, turn left in 600 feet, turn left in 400 feet, turn left now, you idiot. And that is tracking you the whole way, because you have a little way of communicating through your phone or through your GPS. You have a way of knowing exactly where you are. So when you think about it, the idea of how this happened, the adjacent possible, took 350 years and started out with people like Kepler and Newton, and moved through to a couple of really bright guys at Johns Hopkins who figured out what the satellites look like. And then there are political things that are involved in getting the data and releasing it to the world. And now we all benefit from GPS. And for you guys, it's just something that's in your pocket every day that you can use. So think about ideas, think about where they come from, and do some reading. I can give you lots of resources if you like. Thank you.